Hey folks, your OS Reviews. You're watching our video first look and review of the GPD XD. This is a Windows-powered handheld gaming console that is extremely good for emulation, and it plays back a number of titles and also features a 5-inch IPS capacitive touchscreen display. The form factor itself is a clamshell, and it reminds me quite a lot of the Nintendo 3DS XL, and that's not a bad thing because it feels well constructed despite being made entirely out of plastic, and it has a very glossy appearance that does attract a fair amount of fingerprints, but at the same time makes it look more expensive than the $160 price would suggest. Speaking of, GPD these days have been making more and more Windows-powered UMPCs, so they can also be used for emulation and gameplay, but I still think that Android is the best platform in general if you're going to be trying to play back a lot of titles, just because it's a bit more optimized for things like mobile games, and there is just a bit more of a versatility, and you get faster performance than on a full version of Windows 10. And GPD's current lineup, the XD that I'm showing you guys here, also is the one, in my opinion, that has the best gaming controls ergonomics, and it's also the lowest priced option, so it's a very compelling option to consider. It comes in two different colors. There's the traditional black, and we have the wine red version here for review purposes, which again looks very eye-catching. Otherwise, you can see that it's not super slim, but at the same time it still slides easy enough into back pockets or into a backpack for transportation. Here it is next to a 5.7-inch phone. This is the Xiaomi Mi Note 2, which is the same size as the Samsung Note 7 and Note 8, so you get a better idea of what the overall dimensions are like. On the top here, you have access to the ports. They correspond to left and right shoulder keys, which are pretty useful, again, depending on the type of title that you're playing and for what platform it was originally designed for. We'll get into that in more detail in a second. There's also access to a traditional 3.5mm headphone jack, mini HDMI, so you can connect it to a monitor or a television and transform it into almost like a real console. So in that sense, it's similar to the Nintendo Switch. There's also a micro USB port for charging and a mini SD card slot for expanding the built-in memory. This version comes with 64 gigs of built-in storage, which is sufficient for my needs. Charging up the unit takes around 2 hours to complete, and afterwards it's going to get you, I would say, on and off performance roughly 2 to 3 days before you need to recharge it again. So it's pretty good considering its specs as well as how well it runs its emulation titles, but at the same time it's not quite as long as some of the older kind of Nintendo DS consoles, just because that seems to be even better optimized for battery, considering that this is still at the end of the day running on Android. On the front here you have access to a lanyard port, and there's also an LED status light. It's going to illuminate green to tell you that the unit is on, and the hinge is also smart enough to know that when it's flipped open it's going to turn on, and when you close it, it turns off to conserve on battery. It gives you a number of different adjustable positions that can fold all the way 180 degrees flat for interacting with the touchscreen display. The screen itself is extremely sensitive and supports 5-finger multi-touch. It's an IPS panel with wide and generous viewing angles, and it incorporates a HD or 720p resolution, which on a relatively smaller 5-inch display is more than sufficient. More importantly, it's bright enough so that you can still see content when you're outdoors. So this is a pretty good display panel, both in terms of sensitivity and visibility. So powering things up, we can see that immediately we have access to a very non-traditional version of Android. It's almost customized in a way kind of like Android TV boxes, so it's sorted into things like games. There's also Nintendo 64 titles such as Paper Mario, there's Super Smash Brothers, there's also Pokemon Snap. So these are, again, a bit more graphically demanding titles, and they are still rendered as fully playable on this unit. Sometimes you will notice a little bit of drop frames if you have too many apps in the background open when you're doing a Nintendo 64 game, so that's something to keep in mind because some of these games still have fairly demanding graphics. But if you get into some of the other types of games and machines like a Nintendo DS or PS1, then it handles those titles without any problems at all. So again, you have quite a few options here to select from, and all the titles that you see here have been pre-downloaded, so it gives you a selection to start playing without even needing to download the games yourself. Of course, you can also download your own games and then put it into the unit's internal memory. Vice versa, you can go to the Play Store and download some mobile games, things like that. On the top here, I can go over to games, and again, these are some of the Android titles built in. Applications is where you'll find all of your standard Android utilities, including video streaming services like BBC News, AOL. There's even Kodi built right on in, so that's a pretty nice way for you to stream movies and videos online for free. There's also a regular Play Store, there's Netflix, Skype, for video chatting, Twitter, and YouTube. Watching movies is also enjoyable. It acts like a mini laptop or again, like a UMPC, an ultra mobile computer. So with the tiltable hinge, you have the ability to actually enjoy content pretty well, especially considering the speakers are very good and they are stereo as well as front facing on the bottom of the console. So you can enjoy movies on here without any issues. Finally, going into settings quickly, you can see that I can change things like brightness. There are parental controls as well, so if you're giving this to a child, it's easy to set that up. You can remap the gamepad, change the Wi-Fi settings, change the Bluetooth settings, etc. Dragging down from the top, you can also take a look at some of these quick shortcuts that I can toggle between, such as Wi-Fi, so on and so forth. So this is a very heavy customization on top of Android 4.4, which on paper seems a little outdated, but considering that you'll be using this mostly for watching movies and for emulation purposes, it more than suffices. The interface is snappy, it's responsive, and there's very little delay between transitions, so as a whole, it makes the process quite enjoyable. Talking about the controls next, on the bottom here, you can see that it's laid out in a pretty typical format, but they're giving you a few extras just to ensure that all types of games can still be played on here like you would on an original console. So you have access to these analog joysticks, which can also be used to move around on screen if you don't want to use the touchscreen. There's also a four-way D-pad that also is interactive with the screen. There are dedicated A, B, X, and Y keys, which can also be kind of remapped to kind of PlayStation 1 controls, as you can see there. They're all very tactile, responsive, clicky, and risen above the surface of the unit. And on the top here, there's access to L3 and R3 keys, so for additional controls in case the shoulder keys don't suffice. There's also dedicated volume controls. There's a power switch that turns the screen off. A menu key. This is a dedicated gaming menu key. So tapping on this once brings up this control dialog that allows me to additionally change the joystick controls to make it smaller, larger, virtual, as well as remapping them. So this is a nice dedicated function built on in. On the bottom here, there's also a start and select key, which you'll commonly be using to enter into games. And there's also a back key and a home key that takes you into this main screen that you see here. So everything is pretty typical, and it's nice, tactile, and responsive, as well as easy to use with good traveled feedback without feeling mushy, and there is no latency at all when you're gaming on these controls. So it definitely works really well, definitely comparable to the best of Nintendo's own portable consoles, as well as a PlayStation controller in that sense. So GPD really has done a great job in terms of the ergonomics. Alright, so here's a classic Nintendo kind of 64 title, and we can see that again in terms of the action, everything seems quite smooth and playable with no real delays in terms of frame rate, so it's still quite powerful and it's able to handle these games without any problems at all. It definitely is very enjoyable. The emulators are smart enough that you can still save, of course, your game progress, just like with a real console, so you can definitely save the game when you need to and then come back to it at another time. And here's a quick demonstration of Mario Kart, and you can see the controls here. I'm looking through the viewfinder, so it's a little bit harder, are quite easy to use, and again, the frame rates are smooth, graphics are, again, quite impressive, and again, these are traditionally console games, and ported onto this portable form factor really just shows how far we've come in terms of consumer electronics, as well as processing power through the years, but again, it works quite well on this. Another classic title here is Super Bomberman. So again, this is a pretty simple game where you just want to eliminate all of these kind of moving sprites by leaving bombs in this maze, and if it is close enough to them in terms of proximity, then they will be killed and you will complete the level. A quick demo of the video playback abilities. So again, this is just streaming over YouTube, and you can tell that again, the experience is actually quite enjoyable because the speakers on here can get quite loud, and the fact that the overall speed and performance of the unit is also quite quick in terms of buffering and skipping between parts of the video. So everything is, for the most part, again, very enjoyable for watching back media. I should mention that the processing package underneath the hood is technically a Rockchip quad-core processor coupled with 2 GB of RAM, and it's sufficient, again, for the needs of the unit. Likewise, the web browsing experience is also surprisingly good. Everything is speedy, and it doesn't take that much time to re-render or load complex pages. The one thing I will point out, though, is the virtual on-screen keyboard is again on the display. So for typing, you do have to kind of reach upwards, but otherwise, not too big of a deal. And again, the screen is very sensitive, so navigation is quick. And you can tell that, especially with mobile pages of sites, even ones like the New York Times with plenty of images, as well as text and animations, are loading without any problems at all. So really quite a competent processing package. Really surprising because, again, on paper, 2 gigs of RAM doesn't seem like a lot, but it seems to be, again, really optimized in this specific case for gaming and the apps that they have downloaded on here already. So that's the GPD XD. I think that at the end of the day, it's probably one of the best Android Power emulators out there because the controls, the hardware, the screen, the performance are all top notch. And of course, the pricing of around $160 is also extremely fair, especially when you compare it with other GPD devices like the Win or the Pocket, which can sell for 2 or 3 times the price of this thing just because it runs on Windows, when really the utility of that isn't huge. You have something that's this size running on Windows. It's a cool concept, but it's not powerful enough to do full-blown productivity. So I think that the XD here is probably the best choice for most consumers out there, just because it's ready to use right out of the box. The controls are most ergonomic for gaming, and all the emulation stuff, all the key mapping has been set up for you. All you need to do is start opening it up, playing back games. Downloading titles is simple and really just straightforward. So this is, again, a pretty awesome machine in general to explore if you're into emulation, or if you just want something to watch media and is in this really compact and cool folding form factor. You can check out more details about the GPD XD in our official written review, but for now, this has been our review. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews.